Welcome everyone to the another episode. Today we have a Rachel Grant, and she is a sexual trauma coach, and obviously she helped people with their childhood sexual trauma and help them get healing from that, as well as like moving forward with their life. And she had experienced similar condition when she's growing up, and obviously we're gonna learn a bit about her story as well as like how she helped other individuals on their journey. So without further ado, let's get started with Rachel. So Rachel, welcome to the show, and how are you doing today?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm doing well today. Thanks so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I'm excited to learn a bit about your background as well as the topic we have in our hand, which we're going to talk about how this thing actually happened with lots of individuals, and then obviously it's really, really frightening for a lot of people and starting their life and moving forward with their life because it's a big trauma and a lot of people cannot come up out of it, and a lot of people a lot of times they do a lot of things and instead of that. So we are going to talk about how you have been through the similar situation, like how your clients have gone through and how you got out of it, the trauma you healed in your journey. So walk us through, like how old are
Mm,
you when the actual event happened, and how was the process of you getting with your life,
yeah.
and as well as the journey, like how did you heal yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this and to raise awareness and share my story. So, I grew up in a small town, Oklahoma. So, I'm a country
Hmm.
girl at heart. And around 5 years old, my grandfather came to live with my family. It was my mom and my dad and I. My older sister and brother had already moved out, they were much older. So, when he came to live with us, I was very excited to have this, person as someone to play with and spend time with. And I did, like, I would come home from school, I would go pretty much straight to his room and we would talk and, play games. And we spent a lot of time out on the front porch. It's a thing in the country, front porch sitting and, just kind of watching the world go by. And then around age 10, we were out on that front porch one of these days and just sitting there, and I was a very cuddly kid, so I always, sat cuddled up. And
Right.
I remember he always wore this kind of orange fuzzy sweater that I just loved. And then as we were sitting there just talking, I felt him grabbing my breast. Now, I'm 10 years old, so
Hmm.
I'm just barely beginning to understand, the developing body. And, this is Oklahoma in the 80s. So there's a lot of, talk about body safety, consent, any of these kinds of things. And I remember thinking that he just didn't realize where his hand was.
Right.
So I kind of wiggled and moved, but he kind of gripped a hold of me and wouldn't let me get off the swing. And that's really when I started to panic. I didn't understand what was happening. I was really scared. Of course, now now that I've been doing this work many, many years, I understand that my nervous system was going into, activation, and that I became kind of dissociated and
Hmm.
frozen. Eventually, I did jump up and got away from him. And, I ran to my parents' bedroom. They weren't there, but there was this little space between the bed and the wall. And I just remember crawling into that space and just crying and feeling scared and confused. And it's always amazing to me just how immediately we begin to try to understand hurtful experiences, traumas. And when we're a child, we only have a child's mind to use to try to make sense of this. So I just, I started thinking things like, what did I do? Did I do something wrong? And also just confusion, like, was that okay? What was that? Like, no words for it, no understanding of the experience. All I knew is that I now didn't feel as safe in my home as I had beforehand.
Yeah.
And so the abuse continued for some time and escalated and worsened. And, there were various moments along the way where I did start to understand that what was happening was at least not okay. Like, I remember sitting out on the front porch again. It often happened there, and my aunt drove up kind of unexpectedly into the driveway, and my grandfather like snatched his hands away. And
Hmm.
that kind of gave me an inkling that, oh, he doesn't want anyone to know. It's like confirmation, he doesn't want anyone to know. And And all I knew as a kid is that, right, if you do bad things, you get in trouble. And I didn't want to get in trouble. And so I didn't tell anyone, and I didn't even have the words to describe what was happening to me anyway. Eventually, one day, my mom walked by and looked out the window onto the porch and saw him touching me. And she blasted out onto the porch, snatched me away from him. And within a day, he was moved out. My mom and my dad very quickly got him out of the house, which
Wow.
I'm always very thankful for because
Yeah.
I've been doing this work for 17 years with people who have experienced childhood abuse. And, I hear too many stories of people not being believed or, yeah, just outright being blamed. So that was very helpful, of course, that he was no longer there and able to abuse me, but my parents really didn't know what to do next. So they did try to have me go to counseling, but honestly, I didn't want to do that. I was a, 11, 12-year-old girl. I didn't want to talk to somebody about any of this, and so I just became really resistant to that, and they eventually, let it go. But that meant I was kind of left to my own devices to try to sort through, and I was really just trying to pretend that everything was okay.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, right? I was really struggling with my sense of self and my relationship to my body and sex and trusting people. And at 18, when I left Oklahoma and I moved to St. Louis to start college, I met someone, and as we started dating, it became really clear to me that this trauma was really impacting my life. And so I began therapy and began reading books. And this is kind of like what I describe as the survivor stage, when we finally are able to acknowledge the thing that happened to us,
Yeah.
and then we begin to name and identify the experience, start to kind of put some pieces of the puzzle together, like, oh, that's why I'm so angry, or that's why I have so much shame. And so I was in that process from 18 to about 28.
Hmm.
And then as that relationship ended, it actually turned out to be a very harmful relationship. So I was living for 10 years in this kind of weird world of, I'm working to heal past childhood trauma, but I'm experiencing domestic violence at the same time. And so that was really uncomfortable and confusing. And when he and I finally parted ways, it really created the opening for me to step back. And I remember very clearly this moment sitting in my new apartment thinking, my goodness, I am so sick of just surviving my life. I would
Yeah.
really like to live it, but not knowing, well, how do you do that? And at that time, I was becoming very frustrated with the therapy because I felt like I was just talking it over again and again and again. But when I would ask, like, well, so what do I actually do about this? Or how do I actually change that? I wasn't getting any great answers. And so in 2006, 7 is when I really became obsessed with answering that question. Like, what do I actually need to do in order to heal and move on? And so I started reading different things. I did my master's in counseling psychology, and I really just started piecing together for myself the practical, like, tools and skills and mindsets that would help me shift out of that survivor stage and move into what I ultimately came to call beyond surviving, right? I want to do
Yeah.
more than just survive. There has to be something beyond just surviving. And now that is, again, the work I've been doing for 17 years, teaching the Beyond Surviving method, which is essentially just everything I did to support myself in healing and reclaiming my life and being able to move forward.
Yeah. That's really inspiring journey you had. And obviously there is a lot of learning, a lot of trauma, a lot of distress like you had to go through become who you are today, and obviously it's never easy. So walk us through, like, lot of our listeners, and there is a lot of people not aware of like what is actual sexual trauma is. People say like this haven't happened, and it just gone, it's finished, and a lot of people to understand that, like a lot of people mentally or like physically they cannot be like normal how they used to be because of what actually happened. And if you can walk us through, because you've been a victimized and also been working with other victims as well, so how is it feel like being like a sexual trauma, like what does it do to someone mind and like physically as well to be with any partners in the future, or like being around with people, like trusting someone?
Right. So, one way to first conceptualize and understand sexual abuse and sexual trauma is that it is an injury.
Hmm.
And it's an injury to the brain, it's an injury to the nervous system. So when we come into the world, if we have, a safe environment, if we have nurturing caregivers, then we're building and constructing a nervous system that then has the capacity to navigate life and life's stressors. Okay.
Yeah.
And so when the nervous system is injured as a result of this trauma, particularly if we have repeat trauma, it's like the injury happens day after day after day after day, the nervous system essentially becomes weakened and your window of tolerance or your capacity becomes smaller. And so that's going to have an impact on so many different things. It's all a part of your autonomic nervous system, which is the thing, it controls things like sleep and digestion, and
Yeah.
so, if you have this kind of jagged or dysregulated nervous system, then all of those processes are also going to be jagged, which is why people have sleep disruptions and nightmares and, poor gut health and different things like this, as well as, pain, chronic pain. It can really, all of that stored survival stress gets stuck in the body. And so the body is, trying to navigate and manage all of that, and it takes a toll. And then on a neurological level, the brain can become locked or stuck in activation. And so it's like the part of the brain, the amygdala, that plays a role in our fight, flight, freeze response. It kind of
Hmm.
gets stuck in this on position. And so we go through the world feeling on guard, hyper vigilant, always on the lookout. Where's the next danger? Where's the next thing that's going to hurt me or harm me? And then
Yeah.
of course our sense of self is extremely impacted. And shame, that's one of the biggest impacts because we internalize the blame. And we misplace the blame, we misplace the guilt. So then that causes us to feel less than, and we're unworthy and dirty and broken and unlovable and not deserving. And so that's going to trickle out into things like being people pleasing and having a hard time setting boundaries, not knowing what we need, not being able to advocate for what we need. And of course, trauma is relational. Somebody that we, most of the time, statistically, it's in like the 90th percentile,
Hmm.
abuse happens at the hands of somebody that we know, somebody that we trust. And
Yeah.
so when we experience a violation like that in relationship with someone who we cared for, who we thought was going to love and protect us and did not, then that makes the world a scary place. Like, who am I supposed to trust? Who am I
Yeah.
supposed to count on? And so, yeah, people become fearful of abandonment, fearful of connection and intimacy. Of course, it can have, an impact on our sexuality and how we express ourselves or our comfort, in our body and in our sexual expression. So the list is long and I could keep going because that's, I think, one of the things that's just so painful about
Yeah.
this type of trauma is it really, hits every aspect of our lives. But the good news is that trauma is not a life sentence. We are not destined to be injured forever. We can
Totally.
heal an
Yeah.
injury. So I sometimes say, like if you get a broken leg, you don't just say, well, shoot, I guess I got to live the rest of my life with a broken leg, right? Like, no, you're like, okay, well, what do I do? I'm going to do things that help this leg heal and recover. And I found, just in my work that when we apply that same kind of attitude and framework to healing from abuse, then we can really start to feel more empowered and reclaim choice and not feel like this is just, so much and that we can't overcome.
Yeah. And so, like, you've been working with like a lot of your clients and in the same spaces, like how you've been going through. So right now, like, are you helping them? What is like your approach working with them survivor of the sexual trauma? Like, what kind of steps you take to build trust and safety for them?
Sure. Well, so my other background is as a teacher. So before
Okay.
I got into this work, I was an elementary school teacher, and then I was a nanny for many, many, many years. And
Hmm.
so I have a lot of background and insight into like how we develop and how we onboard information and how we kind of scaffold learning. So, one of the things that I've just paid a lot of attention to as I was developing the program and refining it was like order of operations. Like, what do we need to do when in order to maximize healing and avoid re traumatization? And so, where we start in Beyond Surviving is with the foundations of the neuroscience of trauma and working with the nervous system. We really have to have that piece of the puzzle in place first. We
Right.
have to build a person's capacity. We have to increase their window of tolerance. We have to reduce those PTSD symptoms and those trigger responses. And basically just giving people a sense of like, I can put my hands back on the steering wheel of my brain, right? So I'm not
Yeah.
like at the mercy of this reactivity and these negative thoughts. And we have to have that in place because if we try to do any other healing work, like working with shame or even trying to talk about or tell about the experience, um, then your nervous system will literally kick you out. And this is one of the reasons, one beef I have with oftentimes the way therapy is structured is that they do ask people very early on in the process to do an inventory or a timeline of experiences or talk about the things that have happened without having that foundation in place first. And that's how a lot of people end up re-traumatized in even therapeutic spaces.
Yeah.
So we prioritize that in Beyond Surviving as step number one. And then from there, we have to tackle the shame piece. We have to look at the ways that a person is holding a sense of blame, a sense of guilt, a belief that the abuse was their fault, and really taking all of that misplaced shame and guilt and getting it placed where it belongs, which is with the person who caused the harm. And for a lot of people, there's a way in which they logically can see that, but we have to get underneath the logic and really get it rooted into the body and into the emotion of that, which helps people again come out of those people pleasing behaviors, sacrificing their own needs. Um, we also spend a lot of time then on building connection. You know,
Hmm.
shame and dysregulation cause us to separate from other people. We feel different. We feel like we don't belong. If we don't feel good about ourselves, then how are we going to go out into the world and build connections with other people, right? And so we start to really break down the walls that are causing a person to stay isolated and disconnected.
Yeah.
This allows us to then start to work with the emotions like anger, anxiety, fear. We get to do a lot of work on confidence and feeling comfortable in your own skin. And then probably the relationship skills work that we do in Beyond Surviving is the biggest, broadest piece of the puzzle because every day we're navigating relationships, even if it's just the exchange we have with somebody at the grocery store, but really learning how to communicate and set boundaries and trust, because these are all skills that if we haven't had good models for those skills,
Hmm.
then we're not going to be able to really thrive in our lives. And all of that really adds up and all to us being able to move on. And that just means that we've integrated the trauma. It's now a part of our story, but it's not a defining moment in the sense that all of who I am is, because of that. And we're really able to move forward from that, adult empowered self and live from that place more often than not.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. So, Rachel, I have a one last question before we wrap up here, which is those who listening, if anyone listening had some kind of sexual trauma in their life and they haven't spoken about it, or like didn't get some that kind of healing journey on their own, or like any support from anyone, they kind of feel they're in lost and they don't see any hope in there. So what will be like your one advice, despite like you have gone through the similar situation as well as like you have worked with so many people. So what will be your number one advice to someone who's listening as a victim?
Well, I'm going to say it again. The main thing to know is that trauma is not a life sentence. You are not meant to suffer. And while it may seem insurmountable at times, we really can break things down into very small, doable steps and just seek some support. Start somewhere. I have so many free resources at rachelgrantcoaching.com. You can tap into the Facebook group, you can tap into the podcast resources, the YouTube channel. So you can begin to kind of just start the conversation with yourself. Start to get some, idea of what's going on. And as you tap into communities and you don't feel so alone, and you start to understand that what you're experiencing is just like symptoms and outcomes of trauma. It's not because there's something bad or wrong about you. Then we can start to take those steps to really tackle it. So, stay hopeful, stay encouraged, and just start to get into connection and community because that's going to really help propel you forward in your healing.
All right, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that lesson. So, Rachel, we are coming to the end of this podcast. So, before we leave, if anyone wants to learn more about yourself, your business, where is the best place to find you?
Yeah, come on over to rachelgrantcoaching.com. I always encourage people to look for the link to the free checklist because that's a great place to start as well to understand the stages of healing and what are the different types of support that you're going to want to get at each stage. What are the goals for each stage? So, again, that kind of gives you a sense of a framework for where to go and what you need to do. And yeah, just email me, connect with me, and happy to be a resource and a support however I can be.
All right, that's great. Thank you so much for that. So, I wish you very best of luck and thank you so much for coming to the show today. I really appreciate it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's so great to connect with you. And thank you to everybody for listening. Absolutely.
Yeah, that was my pleasure. Thank you. So that's a wrap, guys. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast episode with Rachel Grant. I hope you enjoy our conversation. If anyone wants to learn more about her, I'm gonna put all links on the description for you can get access to easily. So until then, I'll talk to you in the next episode. Take care.